You've tuned in to Just Flag with Melody, and as you can see from the title of today's video, Black and Stupid, we are uncovering the lies they told us to kill our own identity. We have been through so much as Black people, and it's time for us to understand these lies, tackle them head on, and move forward into our future. Sometimes when a lie has been told to you for so long, you believe it, and it hinders you from being who you were created to be. And we are diving deeper into the weapon that was used to keep us suppressed for so long. Let's get into today's video. When Europeans discovered Africa and they came and seen all the riches, all the gold, all the natural resources, the palaces, the kings and queens, the attire that we adorned ourselves in, and the way that we kept our hair and our beauty, they wanted it. One of the first things that they did to ensure they could successfully not only plunder our continent, but erase our history altogether. And that was making an attempt to do away with our language. We know that language is very important. Language connects you to your culture. It gives you your own identity. And it also comes with so much power because words are power depending on how you're using them and what you are choosing to speak into the atmosphere. So they used language as a weapon against us. Language carries memory, and they wanted to erase all aspects of our language because that was further stripping us away from who we were. So when they came to Africa and they put together this plan to enforce slavery, one of the first things that they did was to separate the various languages, intermingling and putting people together who did not speak the same language. This was deliberately done as their first attempt to strip us from our native tongues. If there were any enslaved Africans caught speaking in their native tongue, they were punished. And this punishment was put on public display as to scare other Africans from uttering a word in their own language. They were also forced to learn the language of the colonizers, whether that be English, French, or Portuguese. Having had the opportunity to be here in Ghana and hearing the many different dialects that are spoken, it's a completely different sound. And some languages even almost sound like a melody as it's being spoken. Our original languages comes with so much power. When hearing these languages, it literally feels like the spiritual is coming into the physical. That's how powerful our language is. They knew how powerful we were as a people, and they also knew that they couldn't just do anything if they were coming to tear us apart. But they had to be very calculating, very intentional, and very strategic about the way that they had to handle us. Oh, they took the time to study us, and they also used us to learn our culture. They used us to translate for them, and they used us to gain an insight. Because we're so warm welcoming to people, this was not something that was out of the ordinary. Our hospitality always speaks for itself. And they used this opportunity to take full advantage. When we had good intentions within our hearts, they were planning something totally different. And I don't know if back then our ancestors even thought that it would ever come to that point, nor do I think if they even cared, because we are oftentimes led away by money. That is always our motivation to sell each other out. And they fully took advantage of that in that moment. And I'm sure not only just used money, but also used a friendly smile, making it seem as if they were coming here to befriend us, when in all actuality, they really wanted to become us. They really wanted everything that we had. And they ultimately wanted to build up their own countries. They seen us living so beautiful and they said, why can't we live the same way? If we just find a way and we all move as one, okay? Because they came together, these colonizers, as one body. They got together and had a meeting about this. How can we go to Africa and break the continent up? You're going to take a section, you're going to take a section, you're going to take a section, and we are going to plunder their nations and build our own. Now, even though they had a history of fighting amongst each other, they came together for a greater good, which is what I'm encouraging us to do in this very moment. We have fought each other long enough, and just as they put their differences aside to come together for one agenda, we must do the same. Their next order of business was to spiritually demonize our spirituality and the way we chose to worship. Slaves were often beaten, tortured, and punished for practicing their own spirituality. It was frowned upon by the colonizers, and they often called our way of spiritual practice witchcraft, voodoo, evil, demonic. The list goes on. They then worked to convince us that our way of spirituality was not the correct way of worship. They gave us a white God, handed us their Bible, and then used that very same Bible to now keep their new slaves in line. They gathered us all in a bunch every Sunday and read scriptures to us that a slave should obey its master. And they beat this scripture into our heads. It was something that was repetitive because we know repetition. If you continuously hear something over the course of time, eventually you begin to take on that habit. More and more, we begin to lose sight of our own sense of spirituality. Our own sense of spirituality began to fade. We no longer danced to the sounds of the beating drum. We no longer took the time to worship and appreciate the natural elements that existed. We turned away from our ancestral worship. We started to become a people that we didn't even recognize. Our goal was to make them black and stupid. Take away their name. It has too much power. And so they did. The moment that we were taken captive and sold into slavery, the first thing they did was change our names. In Africa, your name isn't just a name. It represents power. It represents purpose. It represents direction for a child's life. In Africa, they don't just give a name to give a name, but they take their time to do spiritual consultations to see, what are you supposed to be called? What should your name be? And we call that here a naming ceremony that is provided for the child after birth to determine what this child should be called. So when they came up with the idea to strip us of our names and instead give us the names of Europeans, they were taking away our power. Further dumbing us down, we should no longer be people, but they had to make slaves. So we should no longer respond to our given birth names, but now we were expected to respond according to the new European name that we had received. Not only did they change our first names, but we were also giving the last name of our slave masters. They weren't just taking away our first name, but they were stripping us of our complete identity by taking away our first and our last name. They all had one agenda in mind, and that was to plunder our natural resources and make us forget who we were. Because a person that doesn't know who she is, how can they come back and fight for what is rightfully theirs? They didn't want us to be able to identify with who we truly were, which was kings and queens who owned palaces, who started civilization, who developed very important tools that we used in life, such as the writing system. They didn't want us to know that we were the author of many inventions that existed. They didn't want us to know that when they came to Africa, they stole a lot of our blueprints for civilization and adopted it as their own. They didn't want us to know that we were powerfully African. Our history had to be erased. So they went to the furthest extent to make sure that was possible. They traveled all across Africa, damaging our statues, stealing our artifacts, and literally rewriting our history. They began to sell us a story that our history was not our own, but our history was that of the colonizers. That our own statues in our own countries were not black people, but it was Europeans. All in an attempt for them to be able to convert the story that these statues were Europeans and not Africans. They stole our sacred texts and the many stories that were told to them by our ancestors. They had the full blueprint of how to take us down as a people. And when I say they were very intentional about the strategic way that they went about this, they knew exactly what it was that they wanted to do. And they stuck together to make sure that it became a reality. This wasn't just a plot to plunder our natural resources. It wasn't just a plot to suppress us as a people, but their intention was to completely erase us from history if they could have had their way. It wasn't just enough to want control of our natural resources, but they literally wanted to become us. Even still to this day, you can go on YouTube or any other site that has stories about Africa told from a European perspective. And in those videos, you won't see pictures of Africans. You will see pictures of Europeans dressed up in our traditional wear. Europeans parading around our African countries as if it was their own. They instead gave us a new story that we were slaves, that we came from nothing, that we had accomplished so much because they are the ones who developed civilization. And if it wasn't for them, we would still be somewhere running around jungles naked, barefoot, and begging for food. They worked so hard to sell the story to us that we were slaves, but they never ever would dare tell you that you come from a land of gold, that you come from a land of palaces, that you come from a land of prestige, of kings and queens. Divide and conquer. If none of their other plans worked, they knew that with this one, they for sure could forever keep us suppressed as a people. They could forever keep us dumbed down to who we really were. To do this, they started treating some of us better than others. If you were an African of darker skin, you were often whooped, sent to work in the fields, and given very little food to eat. But if you were light-skinned, you were often put inside of the homes, treated better, and given more food to eat. Lighter-skinned Africans were also given special privileges. They were able to do things that the dark-skinned African was not able to do. They immediately began to work on our skin complexion to tell us that our black wasn't beautiful, to tell us that the darker you are meant the uglier you were. It meant that you would get unfair treatment and you wouldn't have access to opportunities that a fairer skinned African would have. It also started to create low self-esteem within the darker skinned African. They started to believe the lies that their skin was ugly because it was dark, or that lighter was better because if you were lighter, you were granted better opportunities. And that still even exists today, unfortunately. There is still instances where you're not offered a job if you're of a darker skin, or they won't afford you the same opportunities as someone who is of lighter skin. So this is a stigma that still continues to carry all the way up until today. And it continues to create an issue within our community of women and men alike. Because of this low self-esteem, we go to extreme measures to uphold their standard of what beauty is. They then began to work on the man. They knew that the African man was the head of the household. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. It was the men who went out to the fields, captured the food, and brought opportunities and finances into the household to support the family. So attacking our black men was their next order of business. They oftentimes belittled men by bringing them to the front of the black communities and whooping them to the extreme. If they didn't break them down by causing them to cry out from the whoopings and the lashes that they were given, then they knew that ultimately they would plead in some way or form, because who can take pain to that extent before they give in? They made sure that they belittled the man as much as possible in front of the black woman and children to see. There were many times where they would remove the male, the slave husband, from the household and send him out into the field to work. While the slave husband would be busy in the fields, they would come into the house of the slaves and rape the women, further breaking down the image of the black man. Because how do you have a strong black man that can't support or provide for his family? How do you have a strong black man that has to be subservient and submissive to a European master? What sense of masculinity could that represent? They knew that eventually the black woman would begin to lose hope, faith, and trust in the black man. They knew that if they can have black women lose all respect for black men, that they could render the black man of the house powerless. And then after the black male succumbs, it's so easy to get to the women and children and control their minds. African men have always been our protectors, has always been our strength, has always been our support system. But that all began to change when they came in and started to diminish the character and the masculinity of the black man. This is something that still continues to flow even until today. All of that trauma that was endured by the black male of that time has been passed on from generation to generation in the black men that we see today. Black men and women are carrying around so much generational trauma that they don't even realize. They sometimes move about life handling things in a certain way, disrespecting each other, and not even thinking to understand where that level of disrespect is coming from. They have to hate themselves because that is going to seal the deal. They knew that this statement was going to take us into a generational long cycle of tearing ourselves down. They told us that our hair was too coarse, it was too kinky, it looked unkept, that we should straighten our hair to look more European, which presented an appropriate look. They mocked us for our thick, full lips and curvaceous bodies. They told us our beautiful black skin was ugly and that it should be lighter. In order to heal as a people, we must first know the tactics that they used against us so that we can use those same exact tactics to work to heal. And one of the first things that we must do is learn respect for each other. Whether you're male or whether you're female, the respect has been long gone between the black man and woman. This respect must first be restored before we can go any further. Division weakens movements. It's not just a fight against outside forces, it's also against the seeds of self-hate that we were taught to plant in each other. They worked so hard to break us into pieces so that we would never know that we were whole. This video isn't about shame, but it's about awareness and awakening. We were taught to hate our skin, question our worth, completely forget our gods, and fear our history. I need black people everywhere to understand that you are not a mistake. Your identity is not a burden. It is a blueprint of divine design. You are not, I repeat, you are not black and stupid. You are kings and queens. That is it for today's video. Drop a comment down below and let me know what you thought about today's video. If this is your first time here on the channel, let me take this opportunity to say welcome and please consider hitting that subscribe button before you go. We also now have a store right here on YouTube, Sacred Minerals, or you can visit sacredminerals.org. Thank you so much for joining me on today's video, and I will see y'all on the next one.